Welcome everyone to the latest in a series of development support webinars delivered by the NHR Academy. My name is Alice and I work at the NHR Academy as Assistant Director for the Developments and Support team. This webinar, Constructive Collaboration, is delivered in conjunction between the NHR Academy and Cappfinity, our leadership programme partners. This webinar will be facilitated by Claire Goodman, who has extensive experience in coaching, facilitation and presenting, and is passionate about helping people and teams achieve their full potential. So Claire, I'll now hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice, and it's a real pleasure to be with all of you here today. So my name is Claire Goodman and I'm an executive coach and facilitator at Cappfinity as part of my portfolio of work. Specifically, I've been working as a coach and facilitator with the NIHR Future Focused Leadership Programme for the last 2 years. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know both the organisation and some of the leaders over that period. My background is in HR and talent and development, working primarily in a global, complex, very matrixed corporate environment where collaboration became increasingly important to get anything done. We spend 50% more time collaborating than we did 20 years ago. Talent is no longer enough. We need to be able to work together well. And to collaborate effectively across the complex health and social care system, we need to be able to maintain focus on our strategic collaboration goals. We need to be able to engage people beyond our usual silos and echo chambers, and to build trust even when we don't always work face to face. So during our webinar today, we're going to be exploring 10 practical ways to do this. This webinar has a number of reflection exercises, so do grab some blank pieces of paper or your notebook perhaps, and be ready to get involved. So to explore what we mean by constructive collaboration, take a look at these cartoons. They were created by a Microsoft employee. We're not suggesting that any of you have a culture that involves pointing guns at each other. Perhaps we could think about them as metaphorical water pistols. But regardless of the appropriateness of the image used, what's very interesting is that seeing these cartoons triggered Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella into a campaign to change the culture. They prompted him to realise that there was an urgent need to move from a dogmatic and competitive environment to one that rewarded collaboration above all else. In Microsoft's case, the first to go was the approach to performance evaluation, followed by a coalition of efforts to encourage the adoption of a growth mindset, encouraging people, in Nadella's words, to be learn-it-alls rather than know-it-alls. And the results were extraordinary. So when Nadella first took over, its market value was around $300 billion. It's now valued at $2 trillion, growing the share price from $20 to nearly $350 at the end of last year. So that's real value creation delivered by a shift in behaviour. So reflect on your own area of work, first of all, and the environment of the wider system in which you work. And I'm going to open an anonymous poll, and I'd like you to answer the question, which cartoon most closely represents your wider area of work and how different teams interact with each other? Is it a bit like Amazon, one big hierarchy? Like Google, lots of cross collaboration but feels fairly chaotic at times? Perhaps like Apple, where there's a central guru leader from which all things emanate? Maybe it's a bit more like Facebook, where it's very interconnected but streamlined interactions. Or does it feel like Microsoft, those warring silos? Or perhaps finally like Oracle, different siloed hierarchies? I'll just give you a moment to complete the poll. Okay, so a real mix actually. So the winner is Oracle. So most people here on the call will feel like you're in those kind of different siloed hierarchies. Google, so lots of cross collaboration, but it can feel quite chaotic, quite complex. Yeah, both of these environments, very, very complex, very large, lots of connections, but there are a few scattered. What's important about this is to acknowledge what the environment is like in which we're attempting our constructive collaboration. What does the environment look like? Let's acknowledge that before we start thinking about how we might collaborate. There's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. This will be really dependent on what we're trying to achieve with our collaboration. So what is constructive collaboration? So a question just to wake up your minds at the start of the session. 5 people all working in a room, might be a virtual room. Is this collaboration? What's the difference perhaps between collaboration and cooperation? So in simplest terms, cooperation is about working with others to achieve our own goals, whereas collaboration is about working with others to produce something together and achieve shared goals. Another question we might ask is Zoom or Teams, are they collaboration tools or cooperation tools? And the answer is probably a bit of both, depending on how we use it. So a better question might be, when is it effective or constructive collaboration? Just by being in a room together and working together doesn't necessarily mean we're collaborating constructively. So how do we do this? Back in the 70s, 2 organizational psychologists came up with a simple model for how we approach collaboration and conflict, and it's still used widely today. This looks at how assertive we are in the process of working together versus how cooperative we are. Or in other words, how much attention do we give to our agenda versus their agenda? And this leads to 5 modes or 5 ways in which we can approach a discussion or task. And to truly collaborate, we need to positively assert our own views and ideas and be positively open to cooperating with the views and ideas of others. It's about finding that win-win. We're getting what we want, but they're also getting what they want. In constructive collaboration, the outcome is often something greater than the 2 individuals or the 2 teams could have achieved alone. Very easy, isn't it, to slip down either of these axes. We either try and compete and try and get across our own views, or perhaps we're just too accommodating. We just give up and we just accept what the other party wants. On some smaller issues, it might make sense to do this, but to collaborate effectively, we need to keep this tension between assertiveness and cooperativeness. So have a think just for a few moments. In which of these 5 approaches do you typically spend most of your time when you're working with others? Note that this doesn't mean we should avoid all conflict or differing views, as we'll come back to again and again in this webinar. So why bother with constructive collaboration? Beyond the cartoons, what are the benefits for us putting in the effort to collaborate across our system? Research shows that constructive collaboration is good for innovative outcomes that have wider buy-in. And so they're more likely to be implemented or last or be sustainable in the long term. One study found that leadership behaviours that nurture interpersonal collaboration are really the true drivers of change. That was a study conducted by the MIT. However, it's good also for those that are involved, with another study finding that the level and quality of interpersonal collaboration has the greatest impact on employee engagement. I can think back to one of the highlights in my career where I was working on a really high-performing team. But as I reflect on it, it wasn't just about having amazing individuals in the team that made it so successful. It was about the interactions between individuals, between the sub-teams, that created this culture in which we all wanted to give our best. We achieved so much more as a collective, but it was also such a rewarding experience on a personal level. Given the benefits that we've just looked at, how can we get people to collaborate more? Seems on the surface like a reasonable and obvious question, and one we might have asked many times. However, according to management theorist and Professor Morten Hansen, That's the wrong question. The right question should be, will collaboration on this project create or destroy value? In fact, to collaborate well, it is to know when not to do it. So according to the research, the time spent in collaborative activities has ballooned by 50% or more over the last 2 decades. But the best collaborators remember that saying yes to something always means saying no to or participating less fully in something else. So we need to be purposeful and constructive in our collaboration, not just collaborating for the sake of it. There's a collaboration cost in time, in effort, sometimes in money. So we need to make sure that the potential benefits of collaboration will outweigh this. So if we decide that collaboration is the right approach and would add value to our project or our desired outcomes, here are 10 ways to make it more constructive. Great minds don't always think alike, but they're often afraid to say so. So in a recent survey, 64% of 400 respondents indicated that they would rather compromise their arguments in order to avoid conflict. But as we saw on the previous slide with the model by Thomas and Kilman, compromise is only half a win in many cases. For true win-win, our teams need to feel empowered to assert their true views in a safe way. That is, the goal is not to remove productive conflicts when collaborating. The goal is to work effectively across our wider system so as to achieve innovative outcomes and deliver work that matters in a really enjoyable way. Julia Rozowski, who's the head of people operations at Google, she shared that we're all reluctant to engage in behaviours that could negatively influence how others perceive us or our competence. And although that's this sort of self-protection is very natural in the workplace, it's actually detrimental to teamwork and to effective teamwork. So the first piece of advice is to encourage safe and productive conflict. Now, some of us are more naturally comfortable with conflict than others, but we all need to get comfortable to some extent with this productive conflict. Practically, we can do that by encouraging questions such as, what do we need to disagree about? What assumptions do we have that might not be true? This is a huge topic in itself. And if you want to dive deeper into this, we'll provide a link at the end of the session to the NIHR and Cappfinity Encourage Safe Conflict webinar on the NIHR TV. Second, when we think about collaborating constructively across our area of work and the wider system, early on, we need to agree on the shared goals that we can all sign up to, so that when there are difficulties or conflict between different parts of the system, or things go off track or get paralysed by meetings, we can then keep going back to what is the bigger common goal that we're all ultimately trying to achieve together. And this can help to ease tensions and recoup momentum. For example, on this slide in the cartoon, at first, it seems as if the two people are seeing things in totally different ways. One sees a 6, one sees a 9. However, if we focus on where they do agree, we can see that they both agree on the same shaped symbol, just from a different perspective. Or in a real world example, how often have we been in meetings where we're disagreeing and actually we get to the point where we think, are we actually disagreeing, or do we actually agree here on something? How do we step back and work out what it is that we are both agreeing on? So I want you just to reflect for 30 seconds or so. Where have you successfully managed to agree shared goals across different departments, perhaps, or different areas of NIHR or across the health and social care system? Where have you seen this been done well in your context? Just a few seconds just to pause and think about that. The reality is that often our short-term goals from different areas feel like they are competing. What do we do in those situations? In many cases, we need to pause and zoom out we need to find out, what are we both looking to achieve? Where are there similarities? Where is it similar, but actually perhaps we have a difference on how we should get there? And those skilled in systems leadership constantly are zooming out to the big picture. For example, we're all here to improve the health and wealth of the nation through research. And we're able to hold those tensions between the different perspectives in the wider system and work with these rather than getting drawn into unhelpful or toxic conflict. It's about building coalitions of purpose to get results. Thirdly, we need to think purposefully about who to involve in our collaborations and who not to, as we said earlier. There's some work done by Dr. Cross, this organisational network analysis, which maps an organisation, and it maps the typical silos in an organisation and some of the bottlenecks that can occur by tracking the actual communications between individuals and teams. So this gives the organisation a really accurate picture of who the real influencers are, but also where the bottlenecks lie. Who are the people that everyone seeks out? And who are those who are stuck perhaps on the periphery, the wasted potential? These real networks often look very different to the supposed hierarchy of an official organisational chart, i.e. who actually has the most influence. And they often reveal how siloed teams, departments and organisations still are, with most information flowing within the boundaries and relatively few information lines crossing to the wider system within which they work, such as this example from AB Sugar on the slide. So in this example, the large blobs are the bottlenecks that all the comms traffic is going through between the teams. But there might be some more experts on the peripheries of these different networks that no one is consulting. So take a moment to just think about your own communications map or your organisational network analysis. What would that look like in the area that you're working with? Where are the actual comms and influence rather than the official hierarchy and org chart lines? In your upcoming collaborations, watch out for those bottlenecks. Avoid trying to collaborate or connect with those that are overly busy, they're well connected, they're influential, but they're already heavily sought out. They'll be the people who have the least time to help you. Cross's research shows that for a given area of expertise, only 5 to 15% of available experts, those high profile individuals who are thought to be the most knowledgeable, are heavily sought after. Instead, he recommends that organisations can benefit from shifting collaboration demands from the bottleneck individuals onto underutilised employees, who may include as many as 20% of an organisation's high performers and most newcomers who are on the periphery of the network. So for your own collaboration projects, aim to also network with those outliers. Who's on the edge of your communications map, who could have great insights, but they're just not known yet as the person to go for this. To illustrate our next point, let me lead you down the garden path for a moment. This is a concept in architecture called desire paths, and as illustrated in the picture above. Irrespective of where the architects decide to put the concrete paths, the people have spoken and they've carved their own path. Many different park users have obviously thought, I need to get over there, so it doesn't make sense to walk along the tarmac paths. This is true of any project outcome that we're trying to achieve at work through our collaborations. People will go down their own desire paths. We won't bring them along with us if we don't initially garner their diverse views about where they naturally want to go. So we run the risk of setting paths and trying to make people go down them, rather than first noticing and gathering differing points of view and using those to make our plans and decisions. People in your echo chamber will tell you your plans for concrete baths are just fine. But when you enact your plans in the real world, you may find that no one follows them. For example, engaging those hard to reach patients, for example. You need their views early on. Or in another example, more linked to our working world. So imagine you needed to go and get some feedback on your performance. You could A, go to the people you have a great relationship with, B, go to people that you've got an okay relationship with, or C, go to people that you perhaps have had a bad relationship with. Most of us would go to A and probably a bit of B. But who could we go to get the most insightful feedback from? Probably B and a bit of C. Moving to when we're trying to collaborate then, typically we surround ourselves with those that are easy to work with, or they're likely to agree with our point of view. But even when we get better at connecting across our system, it's easy to surround ourselves with those that will like what we have to say or agree with us. However, to collaborate constructively, we also need to plan to connect with people outside of our echo chambers, i.e. those with a diverse perspective, diverse experience from across our system, so as to reach the most robust outcomes in our collaborations and make sure we can bring the wider area with us. So visually, we can think of this as on the slide. So when we have conversations with other like-minded people, the result looks uniform and similar to what we already thought. However, when we have diverse people involved, the output is affected by their input and is so much richer. I've been involved recently in a wonderful programme for a group of youth sustainability ambassadors for a large organisation in the Emirates. And as a programme team, we have a rich and diverse set of skills and backgrounds. We have an engineer who really understands the subject matter and the expertise of the organisation. We have an expert in entrepreneurship who's helping participants cultivate the right mindset they need for change in the organisation. We have leadership development professionals who understand how to put together a rich learning journey for participants. And we have a local coach who really understands the local culture of the participants. We're all so different. We have really different views, really different backgrounds, different levels of expertise, but we've thoroughly enjoyed collaborating together to produce a successful programme that none of us individually could have thought of. Another example is a study of financial traders that MIT found that social explorers with a diverse network performed much better than those with a larger network. The traders who had the right level of diversity of ideas and people in their networks experienced a return on investment that was 30% higher. And in his book, Rebel Ideas, The Power of Diverse Thinking, Matthew Syed also demonstrates that meeting those we disagree with can counterintuitively make us happier and more fulfilled. So back to our own world of health research, this is about connecting and collaborating, those in industry, with the public, with patients, with NHS staff, and situations and people who don't just tell us what we think we want to hear. By breaking out of our research, our leadership, our thought bubble, and exposing ourselves to diverse thinking, we'll stay close to the why, to the purpose, and to the goals of our collaboration. And linking this back to the first principle of encouraging safe conflict, we're much more likely to achieve this if we include those with diverse perspectives in our collaboration teams. So take a moment and just reflect and write down an action for who else you could include in one of your current or upcoming collaborations that would bring a diverse viewpoint to the team, who would really challenge your thinking and who would make sure that you're conducting research or work that really matters. Hopefully you've started thinking about someone who could bring a different perspective and who could help you break out of your siloed thinking. When we proactively connect with potential new collaborators, outside of those bottlenecks, outside of those echo chambers, we need to then find out their caring sweet spot. That is, think through what are their values and preferences. How aligned are they to your project, or in what ways are they aligned to your project? What are the potential gains for that person or that department or that team? And what are the potential pains for them? Mapping this out will help us decide the most effective way to engage them and to make them feel excited about collaborating with us. So I'm just going to give you a little bit longer now, just 2 minutes, to think about. You might want to take the person that you've just thought about, or perhaps someone else that you're struggling to engage with in your collaborations, and start mapping this out for someone. What are their values and preferences? Where are they aligned to you in your project? What are some of the potential gains and what are some of the potential pains for them at the moment? So we highly encourage you to keep working through that after the webinar. And these prompt questions will be included on the handout that you receive, as Alice mentioned. So as the programme goes on, or the project goes on that you're working on, do keep these 4 elements in mind for all of your collaborators, so as to work effectively with each and to continue to build those trusting relationships. As Hemingway shared in this seemingly blindingly obvious piece of advice, the best way to find out if you can trust somebody is to trust them. However, he makes an important point. Once we have the right, diverse, collaborative team on board, we need to establish trust in our project teams. This is the absolute foundation for everything that follows. At the start of a collaboration project or in a newly formed project team or squad, we can capitalise on what's known as swift trust. This is when groups first form. People are usually willing to give others the benefit of the doubt. There's this prevailing feeling at the start, which is, the sense of we're all in this together. Success will reflect well on everyone, whereas failure could hurt people's careers. This is what's colloquially known as the honeymoon period. This is particularly true if the group is under pressure to perform, so that in effect people have little choice but to trust each other. So how do we do this? There are lots and lots of ways to build trust. There are some really simple exercises which we can do to intentionally create the conditions for it to form. These exercises are very simple, but brilliant to use at the start of project meetings to swiftly deepen relationships. And here's just 2 examples that you could use and how you might do them in practice. First example, this is me. So this is how you could run an exercise with your collaboration team. You just simply ask people to bring in an object or an item or a picture that inspires them. Could be linked to work or something outside of work. They bring it to the first project team or collaboration meeting. This could be virtual or in person. If it's a virtual meeting, you could add the extra challenge, and rather than pre-warning them, give them 60 seconds to run and find an object or an image that inspires them there and then. That's also good practice for creative and agile thinking, which is an essential collaboration skill. Next, give everyone 60 seconds to introduce themselves and share why their chosen object or item or picture inspires them. You could use a timer to make sure people stay on track, to practice being short and sweet in their communications, which is also a very useful collaboration skill. If it's a virtual meeting, go to gallery view, make sure everyone can see each other, hold up your items and call on each person to introduce themselves and share their item in 60 seconds. Even with people that you have worked with before, you'll be amazed at how much you can get to know someone and their underlying values from that 60 seconds, which is going to help you work with them more effectively as you know a little bit more about them and what will keep them engaged. The second exercise is called making connections. This is how you can run the second exercise with your teams. So you divide people into smaller groups of about 4. If it's virtual, you can put people into breakout groups and just give them 5 minutes to find at least 3 things in your group that you all have in common beyond the obvious things. So for example, perhaps you find that you've all lived in more than 2 countries in your life. Prompt the smaller groups to be ready to share these with the other teams after 5 minutes. If they easily get to 3, tell them to keep going and to find how many commonalities they can find in total. Obviously, the most obscure, the better. and then come back together and get the different groups to share their commonalities with each other to see if you can find any others across the group too. What's interesting is then to debrief this exercise. So ask your project team, what's the impact of knowing these things about one another? What did we notice? How did we go about finding those commonalities? A few things will come up. Firstly, about having a curious mind, asking questions. That helps us to better make connections, which can help us also as a fellow collaborator. And secondly, when we adopt a mindset where we're looking for connections and commonalities, we'll likely find them. And this is such a change to what we tend to focus on, which is our differences. Again, this is another really important skill for collaboration. There are lots of exercises like this out there, but just make sure they're short, snappy, and there's a clear purpose to them, which you explain explicitly. So, number 7, do what you say you'll do. As the project progresses, maintain the early trust you've built by simply doing what you say you'll do. To illustrate this, let me just share some research with you. So over 2 years, Google conducted over 200 interviews with Googlers, with their employees, and they looked at more than 250 attributes of over 180 active Google teams, including both the engineering and the sales teams. And they found that who is on the team matters far less than how the team members interacted, how they structured their work, and how they viewed one another's contributions. They learned that the top 2 dynamics that set successful teams apart from the other teams at Google, as measured on their outputs, were the following. Firstly, the psychological safety. Do we feel comfortable to speak up, to be our authentic selves, and to take risks on this team without feeling insecure or embarrassed? This links to that swiftly building trust. And the second was dependability. Can we count on each other to do high quality work on time? Or, as Ralph Waldo Emerson famously espoused, your actions speak so loudly, I cannot hear what you're saying. i.e., if we say all the right things and then don't deliver on early milestones, people will lose trust in us very quickly. I'm sure we've all worked for people or been in situations where there were individuals who are full of good ideas, lots of promise, great visionaries, that ended up over-promising and then didn't deliver. It's so easy to feel disillusioned. Let's not be like that. Much better to under-promise and then over-deliver. Do what you say you'll do to build trust. The 8th thing, active listening. So underlying all this, in constructive collaboration and building trust, it's crucial to actively listen. That is, actively listening to words, to intonation, to non-verbal cues, without judgment, with all the people that we're collaborating with, especially those that we have less surface level things in common with, or don't immediately click or connect with. This will help us stay true to that true collaborating mode, rather than slipping into the competing mode, trying to just put our view across, going back to that Thomas and Kilman model. We all know how important it is to listen well, but it's a skill that's so undervalued and so underutilized, especially when we're all busy, we're all in a rush, we're all preoccupied with what it is we need to do. Reflect on what level of listening you've been using in this webinar so far. For those that have been perhaps attempting to listen by multitasking, how often do we take that similar approach in our project meetings? Reflect on what the benefits are of instead really leaning in, focusing on that active, attentive listening. Work out what it is that helps you to listen well, and what are your triggers that easily distract you or take you back into yourself. As Dr. Michael West, Professor of Organisational Psychology, who's dedicated his career to improving work in healthcare settings, shared, to be compassionate, I have to first of all be present with you. I have to pay attention. I have to listen with fascination to you. Listening with fascination. It's a lovely phrase, but if we're honest, how often do we do it? What could help us to do that just that little bit more? 9th, agreeing ways to work. So given we all have different strengths Different individuals will have their own ways of communicating or working together. We have to not assume that everyone does things the same way. Otherwise, this can lead to confusion and conflict when trying to collaborate together over time. So the next approach to constructive collaboration is to explicitly agree ways of working for this specific collaboration project. This is really a process of contracting with one another, and this often gets so overlooked at the start of our work together. So here's a practical checklist of what to work through at the start of a collaboration, but also something to then come back to again and again through our project. So what are our key milestones? How often and how do we want to meet? Whether that's physically, whether that's virtually, how are we going to use technology when we meet? Perhaps we need to agree to all put our webcams on when we meet for virtual meetings. Except for walks and talks. So walks and talks are when we're just catching up with one person that we're collaborating with, and we don't necessarily need a screen in front of us. It might be really beneficial just to get outside, go for a walk, talk as you walk. That also helps us to re-energize and allow for greater focus. Really think about how and when you're connecting with one another. How are we going to communicate in between our project meetings? And how will we give each other feedback? So always from a place of empathy and from kindness. How do we make sure we're comfortable with giving each other feedback through the project? So I wonder from those questions and from that list, which may not be 100% clear to those you are collaborating with at the moment. Which of the areas have you perhaps neglected to contract clearly on with your team? Why don't you write down an action for yourself to make sure that this is clarified going forward? Finally, number 10, coming into land. So as well as agreeing ways of working up front, really important to have regular check-ins with your team that you're collaborating with, particularly when we're working predominantly remotely or in a hybrid manner. Yes, this includes checking in on progress against milestones, but also on people's workload and their emotional state, how they're doing. And a really nice tool you can use to check in on the latter is this team roller coaster, where step 1, you draw a wavy line that resembles a roller coaster across an entire, perhaps flip chart or a whiteboard online. Make sure to include loops and steep sections and shallow sections. And step 2, ask each team member to just draw themselves on the roller coaster, depicting how they're feeling right now, and then share that with the group. If everyone does this one-on-one, step 3 is then you can look at where everyone is on the roller coaster as a team and just share and discuss any thoughts that emerge. I wonder, as you think about a collaboration project that you're involved with at the moment, where you might place yourself on this roller coaster. The second part of the regular check-in is perhaps every month, every quarter, maybe at the end of a project or after a particularly involved or complicated stage in the project. It's also beneficial to run these retrospectives or retros. These are perhaps more formal than a quick check-in, and their purpose is to share progress towards high-level goals, to be able to celebrate success so far, which we're often not very good at doing. We're always looking to the next thing, but how do we celebrate what's gone well? And to look for ways to improve and tweak ways of working going forward. So we might cover, a reminder of the collaboration objectives and targets. We might talk about how we're progressing towards these key results achieved. We might want to celebrate individual or group successes linked to those objectives. We may look back over the last period and share themes. What have we liked? What have we loved? What have we lacked? And what have we longed for? Is a really nice model to use. And What are our ideas of ways to improve or innovate in ways of working next month? Let's not be complacent. How can we do even better? It's very easy to read through these and to nod and to think, yes, that sounds like a great idea, but it's so hard in practice to make the time for these kind of conversations to happen. So take a moment now and just think about when could you run some sort of conversation like this? When would be the right time to have this kind of conversation with a collaboration that you're currently working on? So to summarise the webinar, here are the 10 ways to constructively collaborate. This is our practical toolkit of approaches, if you like. Number 1, encourage safe and productive conflict. Number 2, establish and communicate shared high-level goals. Number 3, connect across the system beyond those bottlenecks. Number 4, connect with diverse views, not just echo chambers. Number 5, find their caring sweet spot. Number 6, building swift trust. 7, do what you say you'll do to continue building that trust. Number 8, actively listening. Number 9, agree those ways of working. And then finally, number 10, have those regular check-ins, including those retrospectives. I wonder, from everything you've heard today, what is an action that you might personally take as a result of hearing? What's particularly resonated with you? What's an area that you feel you can do better in? I'll just give you a moment to reflect on that. So for those whose curiosity has been piqued and you'd like to find out more, we've provided a range of other resources that you can delve into, whether your preference is to read, to listen, or to watch. If you complete the evaluation at the end of this session, you'll be sent a copy of these slides, including links to these further resources. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm going to now hand back to Alice, who's going to help us facilitate our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Claire, for delivering such an interesting session. That was brilliant. So we're going to open up the Q&A now. There is still opportunity to submit questions if you've now got something that you would like to add, and you can use the Q&A button. Or if you want to take a look at the existing questions, you can upvote those. If there's a particular question you can see there that you would like answering. I'll start. Let's have a look. We've got a number of questions here. The most popular one at the moment. Claire, what if there are lots of conflict in our collaborations that doesn't feel very safe or productive? What do you advise then?
Yeah, this is really hard, isn't it? And it really goes back to building trust. I think so. I mentioned another webinar on encouraging safe conflicts, so I'd really encourage people to go back and watch that, because we delve into that in more detail. But it's really about going back to that building trust. Patrick Lencioni is another excellent expert in this area, and he says even if there is trust, you always need to build more trust, because it's so easy, especially when we're trying to operate across very complex systems. We come from very different perspectives. You know, more and more of our challenges require that collaboration between different areas, and of course there's going to be conflict. So I think one is to expect it, as I said, just get comfortable with it. I personally, I don't enjoy conflict, so it's something I've really had to work at, you know, how to just get comfortable at not taking things personally, being honest, being prepared to, being brave, having the courage to have those open conversations. It depends really what the conflict is in the room as well. Is it really with one individual? Are we actually conflicted because we're arguing about how to do something, not the why? So maybe going back to the why can be helpful. So it depends what it is, but I'd say be open and honest about the conflict and what's happening, and then work out the best way to address it.
Fab, thank you. Yeah, and I think it's keep working at it, isn't it, and finding those common grounds with people. Everyone's different, everyone has different motivators, and you know, you've got to get to know people, haven't you? I think. Fab, thank you. Okay, what if our collaboration or project seems to have lost momentum and direction? We're stuck in endless meetings, but nothing seems to really move forward.
I think this happens all the time, doesn't it? All the time, because we have so much energy at the start, full of good ideas, and then just the reality of trying to get things done, trying to move forward, things get complex, things stop us, it feels impossible, and we lose that momentum. I think going back to that original goal, like what are we trying to achieve? Let's go back, having those kind of retro conversations, as I mentioned, just let's pause. I think being honest about where they are. I think a lot of people think, well, it just feels a bit icky, or we've lost momentum, you know, I'm just going to not bother investing so much in that, or let's just try and get through this. But actually just being open and being having the courage to have that open conversation, to give that feedback, to talk honestly without people getting offended, but and you know, taking things personally. But how do we have this honest conversation about where we are? And just coming back to that contracting, that, you know, what did we say we were going to do? What are we trying to achieve? How are we doing it? Let's do that. And the earlier we can get that, you know, nip it in the bud before it becomes protracted and, you know, everyone's getting fed up. The earlier we can do that, the more often we have that kind of culture of constant feedback and tweaking and changing things as we go, the easier it's going to feel. Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you. Right, the next one that's been upvoted. So what if I've been asked to join a collaboration, but I don't feel the cost of my time and effort of getting involved would be worth it for me or the project, or if I'm simply too busy?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to find out why you've been asked. What's the value that someone thinks you will bring to the project? Just be really clear on what it is that they are looking for from you. It might be that you can contribute in a more focused way, perhaps not joining every meeting or being involved in everything, but you could be involved in a small part, so that potentially is an option. Or it might be just you're not, you know, you've got other things on. It might just be about explaining what other priorities and what other things exist for you right now, and how that's just not a priority at the moment, and perhaps we pick it up later. I think we're always in a rush, aren't we? We're always in a rush to do everything. We set ourselves such a fast pace and we're trying to achieve everything tomorrow. And sometimes it's just learning how we can pace ourselves, how we can manage ourselves in order to make sure it's sustainable. Much better that we get involved in 2 things and do them really well than spread ourselves across 5 or 6 projects. So a lot of that comes down to us. Especially if we're an expert, especially if we've got something to contribute, people will always ask us, you know, we might be that bottleneck person that people are always coming to us. So just being able to demonstrate and role model how you manage yourself in that situation, I think is really important. Yeah,
thank you. Oh, this is a good one. Any tips for how we can support our leaders and direct line managers in working more collaboratively and valuing collaboration? And this is specifically coming from an NHS setting, but I think probably it applies more broadly as well.
Yeah, so how can we encourage our leaders to collaborate? I think as I probably mentioned earlier, looking at organisational design analysis, you know, it's not always, collaboration doesn't always happen through hierarchy. So I think understanding the role of the leaders in the collaborations is really important, but not letting that again be a bottleneck to it happening. So maybe it's just you know, if you spot an opportunity or something that would be really good to collaborate, it's just putting forward that business case, that, you know, what's the rationale, where do you see this adding value, this collaboration adding value, how do you see it working? I think if you go to a leader or a manager with ideas, on something specific that would be really useful to collaborate on. I think it's what I was saying earlier about not everything needs to be collaborated on, you know, all the time. So it's knowing when to collaborate and when not to collaborate. So if you can demonstrate that actually there would be real value in collaborating, and you've perhaps started to do some of that thinking and thought about what you might do, as a leader, that would be really encouraging if someone came to me and wanted to do that, if the benefits were really outlined.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next one that's been upvoted is asking, can you please suggest further learning opportunities or reading about this topic? So about collaboration, constructive collaboration. You've alluded to some additional kind of reading and videos and things. So there's potentially some stuff there in the slides. Are there any other kind of opportunities you're aware of, or things that we might direct people to?
Let me go back for the slide. Yes, just to see. So, because one I would really recommend just from this list is, so that Google research was fascinating, but and they found that, you know, the #1 successful attribute of their successful Google teams was about building psychologically safe workplaces. And that last link, that talk by Amy Edmondson, is one I recommend all the time. It's absolutely fantastic. It gives you really, really interesting examples of where people haven't felt safe and the devastating consequences for organisations when people haven't felt safe to speak up when they actually were the ones that spotted something, and just the importance of proactively building that culture where people feel safe to speak up. So if you're kind of interested in any of the content that I was talking around psychological safety, or bringing diverse views in, or building that culture where we all contribute, that would be my sort of #1 recommendation. And the other one that I mentioned briefly, but that's not on there, is Patrick Lencioni. So he is an American organizational consultant and talks huge amounts. He's got loads of stuff on his webinar about how to build trust. So he's the one that talks always about, even if you've got trust, build more of it, because it's the absolute foundation for everything, and it always needs to be worked on. And he has some great, really practical books and tools and tips and videos that really help with this whole concept of how we do team really well, how we collaborate, how we build trust, how we are vulnerable, how we deal with conflict. He has lots of brilliant resources.
Thank you. So I think this then leads on to a question that I think probably this will be a good place for this person to start, a good resource for them to start. But any tips for feeling more confident when someone approaches you in a conflictive manner, if you kind of have a difficult one to deal with, and feeling comfortable and confident to respond to them?
Listen. I would say listen to what it is. What is it that they're saying? Don't take it personally. I think don't take it personally. Really listen to what is behind what they're saying. I think it's about recognizing the emotion first of all. If people are coming to you in conflict, there's probably some emotion there. So what is the emotion you're sensing, and what is behind that? And ask questions. Listen, ask questions. Show empathy. Try and find out what it is that's really upsetting them. Often, if people are in conflict, it's because there's a value that's been ignored or stepped on. So what is the value behind what they're saying? What is it that they're not happy with? What's been stepped on? And if you can try and get behind that emotion and find what the value is, then again, it's like that you can then have a conversation on a different level. Because you go, okay, now I understand how, and then how can we move forward ensuring that value is respected, and that can often be really helpful. But it's definitely something that we have to get comfortable doing with practice, because a lot of us do find conflict really, really, really tricky.
Yeah, it's having that awareness, but then also the resilience to not take everything personally and just think, but take a step back and say, kind of, what's going on, like you say, what's the other side,
and not just going on with them, but also what's it triggering in me. So if someone's come to me and they're in that mindset or in that mode, or they're saying, what is it, why am I, what emotions are being triggered, or what thoughts are being triggered in me, and am I aware of that, and how can I put that to one side and just listen to that person?
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question here in your talk, just asking, what does the RACI acronym stand for on Agree Ways of Working slide? So is it RACI, or I don't know how you say it. RACI was one of the acronyms that you used, and what does that stand for?
Yes, so it's about being responsible, accountable, consulted and informed. So it's a really good model for just thinking about how we engage different members of our teams.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got a few more questions. I'll just do a couple more. The last two, I think, now in the last couple of minutes. The first question we had is, what if we can't agree on shared goals or objectives? What do we do then?
I always take inspiration from the story that I don't know if you know Christiana Figueres. So she worked at the UN and she was responsible for or very instrumental in the Paris Agreement, the climate change agreement in Paris. So she talks about the story of she picked up the mantle after Copenhagen, where it had all fallen apart. And she talks about her journey to get to a place where she got these countries to agree. And obviously there's lots of very interesting things about that story, but the thing I remember most is that she said, as she spoke to each country's delegation, she asked them, she listened and she asked questions about what is it that you value, what's important to you, and they almost would come to her with their little circle of what was important to her, and she would ask more questions and more questions about what they valued to get them to expand that circle. And she said over time, as she spoke to everyone kind of, she could expand their circles, and as soon as they were kind of expanded enough, she could find that overlap between the different perspectives. And as soon as she found overlap, then she could find something that they could all agree on. And if she can do that with all those countries' delegations to get to a climate agreement, you know, agreed amongst all the nations, then I think that gives me inspiration, that listening and asking questions, helping people work out not just the small thing that they come to you with what they care about, but what's the bigger thing. And if we can help people to expand what they really care about, what they value, then we can find the overlap between different parties.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's an excellent example. Thank you. Right, we'll bring things to a close there with the questions, but thank you very much, Claire. I hope everyone has found this webinar beneficial and feels able to implement some of the behaviours that it's explored, and there's some really useful kind of tips and tools and exercises to work through. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, for those of you that have joined us live, we'll close the session in a moment and you'll be asked to complete a quick evaluation form. The link is also available in the chat. This will give you the opportunity to share your email address, and you'll also receive then a copy of the slides, and we'll be very grateful for your feedback. All of the past webinars can be found on the NHR TV YouTube channel under the Development and Support Webinars playlist, and you'll find a link to this in the chat box as well. A couple of other things that have been dropped in there are our online leadership development resources on NHR Learn, as well as our NHR Academy events page. And if you have any questions at all, you can contact the development support team at the Academy directly as well via email, and the email address has been shared. So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.